The FDA is empowered to require drug companies to continue clinical trials of drugs even after they've been approved. And this option, the phase 4 clinical trials, they're called, is especially useful for drugs that have received expedited review through the FDA. In other words, the FDA has agreed to approve drugs faster than it otherwise would. The trouble is, phase 4 clinical trials aren't used nearly as often as they should be used.
What is the real relationship between the pharmaceutical industry and the FDA?
As a drug chemist, I discovered that FDA drug approval wasn't based on science. It was based on financial conflict, where 6 out of 10 scientists who have financial conflicts of interest say, yes, this drug should be approved.
There are people who go to the FDA thinking in the back of their minds if they behave properly towards the industry, they will be rewarded with a job in the industry.
One of the most recent illuminating incidents of that revolving door policy was the presence of a man by the name of Daniel Troy, who was the chief counsel to the FDA for a period of time. And prior to his becoming chief counsel to the FDA, his law firm was very active as an advocate for the pharmaceutical industry, the tobacco industry, and other elements of our economy which are regulated by the FDA. He no longer holds that position, but while he was there, interestingly enough, he was a chief advocate for the economic entities, particularly the pharmaceutical companies, that the FDA oversaw. And of course, when he left his position as chief counsel of the FDA, he went right back to the regulated industry and probably benefited economically from the experience that he had here in Washington.
It used to be that you weren't allowed to have any financial benefits from the drug companies if you were on the advisory board or a member of the FDA or the CDC, but that's not the case anymore. 3 of the 5 people that voted to approve Vioxx were connected to the companies that were manufacturing it.
When you look at the experts who are on television commenting on a story, or on some of the physician websites that are out there that are increasingly popular, or who may be providing testimony to Congress, if you look at their backgrounds and where their money comes from, in the vast majority of cases, unfortunately, it comes from the pharmaceutical industry. And whether they declare the bias or not, they are clearly influenced by who's paying the bill.
If it is true that the drug companies are the ones that are sort of self-evaluating these drugs, of course they have an inherent desire to make these drugs, pass FDA standards. Who's looking out to see if that's really happening?
When I was invited by Senator Grassley's office to testify, I was faced with this dilemma. Do I sort of lay it on the line and tell them the way it really is, or do I kind of downplay it? And there are ways of doing that. But what I concluded is that I'm now being given the opportunity to tell the truth to the people who are in a position to actually make a difference. I can't make a difference. I can't change FDA, but Congress can. If I don't tell them the truth, then I'm now responsible, in part, for the deaths of people that happen in the future. And I'm basically a co-conspirator, if you will, with FDA and what happened with Vioxx, because all these tens of thousands of people were injured or killed because FDA's disregard for safety. And if I kept quiet about that, now I'm part of the problem. I'm one of them. And my conscience tells me, well, you know what you have to do, you know what the truth is, and now are you going to speak it or aren't you?
I started getting arthritis in my hands because I did physical labor on my job, and they put me on Vioxx, and it began as a low dosage. I eventually ended up on the 75 milligrams, and I was on that for 6 or 7 months, and then I started feeling like I couldn't balance right. It was like I was dizzy and I couldn't balance. So I called my doctor, and she said to go to the emergency room, and they admitted me and said I'd had a mild stroke. I've since that time had my whole life turned upside down. I was employed by General Motors in the auto industry, and General Motors talked to my doctor, and my doctor sent me to a rehabilitation specialist, and then they sent me a letter and they said, it's not safe to have you work anymore, we're retiring you. And I was like, I don't want to retire. I get this letter 3 weeks later from Social Security, and they said, your employer's contacted us and you're too sick to work and we're going to retire you, and this is when your money starts. And I started calling people. I said, don't take my job. Don't do this. I'm 56. And even with all of that happening, my health was getting worse and worse. And at one point, I got to where I couldn't even stand up straight. And I dragged my leg, and my right hand use is kind of limited because it's kind of stiff and dragging.
Back in early 2004, the SSRI, antidepressants, and suicidal behavior was a big safety issue. FDA had suppressed a report written by a colleague of mine in drug safety and had prevented him from presenting this information at an advisory committee meeting. That information got leaked to the media, and it embarrassed FDA because now FDA was caught suppressing information, suppressing its own scientists on a very important public health issue involving children.
The doctor told us that he thought the drug Prozac would help Jacob, that it's a common prescribed drug used in teenagers now, that he thought it would help him with his moods and just make him feel happier. So he was put on Prozac that afternoon, 10 milligrams. The morning of my son's death, we had talked that morning. He did not want to go to school that day, and he just said that he would go the next day. They were getting out for Christmas holidays. I left for work, and a few hours later I began to call home because with him being at home by himself, I was concerned, so I did not get an answer. And I continued to call for a couple of hours, then I left, and it took me 30 minutes to get home, and I found my son hanging in our attic. My husband and I attended a FDA hearing in Washington about the side effects that can happen with these drugs, and unfortunately the first hearing there was 65 parents there. Their children had died while on antidepressants. Some of them were on the drug a matter of days before they committed suicide.
After being on Prozac for 21 days, my wife shot and killed both of these two boys right here. She turned the gun to herself and shot herself twice. Now she's in jail for murder.
Since I've been on Prozac, I've experienced the following adverse reactions. A drug-induced insanity that has caused several self-destructive outbursts. There was an extended period of anger, rage, and hostility, and it turned into terrible feelings that suicide was the only answer.
This is hard for me because I tried to commit suicide in front of my 5 children. I didn't know what I was doing. I don't remember exactly what happened. All I know is that my husband took the gun away from me and my children was looking from the other room. What would have happened if these children had seen their mother commit suicide?
My sister did commit suicide in front of Lindsay. Another woman spoke of hollow point bullets. That's what my sister used to do it.
Prior to my Senate testimony in mid-November of 2004, there was an orchestrated campaign by senior-level FDA managers to intimidate me so that I would not testify before Congress. Our acting Senate director contacted the editor of The Lancet, a prestigious medical journal in the United Kingdom, and intimated to the editor that I had committed scientific misconduct, or that I may have committed scientific misconduct, and that they shouldn't publish a paper that I had written showing that Vioxx increases the risks of heart attack. The second was that other high-level FDA officials contacted Senator Grassley's office and attempted to get Senator Grassley and his staff to not support me, to not believe me, and to not call me as a witness.
The problem for government scientists and federal employees in general is they don't have viable legal rights. There's a Whistleblower Protection Act, which is the strongest free speech law in history on paper, but in reality it's been a trap, a vehicle to rubber stamp whatever harassment the bureaucracy wants to impose on a whistleblower.
Senior FDA officials contacted Tom Devine, my attorney at the Government Accountability Project, and attempted to convince him that he should not represent me because I was a bully, a demagogue, that I was guilty of scientific misconduct, that I was just a terrible person, I couldn't be trusted. And these people were posing as whistleblowers themselves.